Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Poetry. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Tatamkhulu Afrika's Nothing's Changed. I'm going to take you through 5 important sections of the poem, so it's going to be great for you making flashcards for your revision. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the opening of the poem. Now, I apologise because it's a little bit of a cheat, me saying 5 quotes, and then I put something as stonking as this in. But the lines are quite short, so I'm hoping you'll forgive me. But I really wanted to give you enough of an example of the sensory language that Afrika is using to open up the poem. So we have small, round, hard stones click under my heels. So notice all of these words in the first line are monosyllabic, and that combined with this quite onomatopoeic verb click is actually creating quite a vivid sound image for you, almost of his footsteps as he walks down this path that he remembers so well. The sensory language continues as he recalls seeding grasses thrust bearded seeds into trouser cuffs, cans. It does go on further. Notice here how much sibilance we have. We have the S here of heels, seeding, grasses. We've got the S of thrust, seeds again here. And actually, if you think about what he's describing, which is these kind of grasses, imagine long, tall grasses with seeds coming out of them. And imagine them sort of rustling in the wind. It really does create the sound of that rustling. So the sibilance is very, very mimetic of the way that the grasses are sort of moving and the sound of the seeds kind of brushing against him. But then what we also have is this juxtaposition with this very soft sibilant sound with all of the S's to this very plosive alliteration of cuffs and cans, and then we've got some repeated T sounds as it goes on as well. So much harsher, which is the beginnings of this interesting juxtaposition between positive and negative. We also have this very dynamic verb here, thrust, which is quite a violent sounding word. It's certainly very forceful, so it might start making you think a little bit about the kind of concept of conflict. Remember, and if you haven't watched the video on context, do go back and have a look. Remember that this is actually, this is a journey that a man is taking, going back to a place that he was thrown out from because of the apartheid. So all of the ideas of happiness of memories, but also the difficult conflict of the past will be all mixed up in his mind, hence that difference. The other thing about this part of the poem is that it's setting up that District 6 is actually not being particularly cared for. The fact that there's a lot of litter, that everything is overgrown, this area feels almost abandoned, which, is ironic because that was actually the reason that they said they were kicking people out in the first place, was they were saying it was nothing but slums and needed to be redeveloped. But here it is, still in a bit of a bad way. Again, sorry about the slightly long quote, but for the structural features, I needed you to see more of it. So what happens before these lines is that he says, District 6, that there's no sign to tell him that, but his feet know. And now we get to our quote. And my hands, and the skin about my bones, and the soft labouring of my lungs. Let's just pause there for a second. So the first thing that you're probably spotting is the anaphora. Anaphora is where a word or a phrase is repeated at the beginning of a succession of lines. If you said repetition, that's fine, but if you want something a little bit more precise, anaphora. So we've got this anaphora creating this sort of like build up of emotion, maybe build up of tension. And there's another thing doing that as well. We've got increasing line length. So if you look at each one, it gets longer and longer. So again, this idea of something building, mounting. And if you look at all of the nouns here, hands, we had feet previously, and then hands, skin, bones, lungs, and then eyes. What Afrika is doing is he's sort of traveling up the body. Yeah, we've got the semantic field of the body, but it's moving upwards. So all of these parts of his body know where he is. So I've not popped it on the page, but it is an extension of the personification before, his feet knowing where he is. And I want you to think about what emotion is building in him. because actually as we get to the end, and look, if you notice, line length's increasing and then suddenly much shorter. So, and the soft labouring of my lungs and the hot, white, inwards turning anger of my eyes. So note, first of all, we've got a little bit of consonance in the repetition of the T's. Okay, you might say to me, Miss, why aren't you calling that alliteration? And that's because technically alliteration is when your letters are repeated at the beginning of the words, but actually these T's are dotted in the middle at the end, but it still has the same effect of creating this quite angry tone. And note as well, the enjambement, run on lines, places emphasis on that abstract noun, anger. Now you might say to me, hang on a minute, why is it anger of my eyes? You can definitely feel that this feeling that's been building, it's been very much of the body, but then it's sort of going upwards, and it's the eyes because of the next thing that he sees, which is on my next slide. Brash with glass, name flaring like a flag, it squats. Now what is that it, you ask me? That it is a restaurant. He sees this restaurant in amongst the land, and he knows full well that it is a restaurant for white people only. Look at the way that it's described. Brash with glass. So that adjective brash suggests a sense of showiness, that it's unapologetic. Name flaring like a flag. Yes, we've got another simile, and note how it has similar connotations. It's about being unapologetic about your identity. It's saying, here I am. You've got fricative alliteration. Fricative is with that f sound. Again, you can just say alliteration if you want, but the most important thing is to think about the effect. It's no good talking about alliteration unless you can say why. And in this case, it's again that angry tone. The f sound is really good for demonstrating anger, which is why some of our naughtier words begin with an F. So name flaring like a flag, it squats. Now, we've got a little metaphor here. Some people say, well, is that personification? And technically it is as well. It's a little bit of both. There's something quite animalistic as well about the idea of squatting down in the grass. So in that case, you know, you're talking about metaphor. But squats has two meanings. It can be sitting like low down, or it can mean when someone takes over a place without the right. So if someone was squatting in your house, it would mean that they didn't have right to be there, but they were there, they were living there. And so actually you can see the restaurant in that way, like as in it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be there at all. It's kind of taken ownership sort of unrightfully. Now, again, I've cheated. I've given you two quotes, but the point I'm making is about juxtaposition. So you need to see both of them. Now, this section here is where Afrika continues to describe this restaurant. Crushed ice, white glass, linen falls, the single rose. So we've got this semantic field of luxury. It ties in with earlier descriptions where it talks about it being a haute cuisine restaurant, for example. But there's a stark juxtaposition between this and the working man's cafe that he describes. And in the working man's cafe, that's where you can get bunny chow, which is like curry but served in a bread bowl. And you can take it with you, you can eat it at the tabletop, you can spit a little on the floor, it's in the bone. And I chose this particular quote in particular because of how informal it is. Yes, it's an imperative, but the point is that he's saying that there is absolutely no airs and graces in the working man's cafe, that there is a sense of it being natural, informal, easy. It's where he feels most relaxed. But what is clear is the juxtaposition between the restaurant, the glass restaurant with the guard at the gatepost, and this very, very informal place. He then describes, it goes back to him being at the restaurant, and he describes sort of looking in, as in the fancy restaurant. He describes looking in with his nose like pressed up against the glass, like he's a little boy again. And this is the final sort of section of the poem. He says, hands burn for a stone, a bomb to shiver down the glass. nothing's changed. So obviously we've got a metaphor here with the hands burn, and that metaphor suggests that he's got this massive need. His hands are burning, they are desperate for a stone. Now look at the way the noun changes from a stone to a bomb. Now you could say that that is an escalation of violence. Yeah, so he thinks about what damage a stone would do, and then he thinks, and what damage would a bomb do? Or you could take it that the bomb is actually a metaphor, that he looks at the stone and then goes, no, it's a bomb. Yeah, it's a metaphor. Either way works. And before you start thinking, oh, well, this sounds really violent, this might be kind of referring back to when he was accused of terrorist activity and put in prison. Well, look at the verb he uses to describe the impact of that stone or bomb. He wants it to shiver down the glass. Now, this in itself is sort of personification, because that's what humans do. And if you imagine the sort of movement of someone shivering, yeah, it's actually very small. It's a small movement. So what he wants to do, yeah, he wants to destroy the glass, but he doesn't want it to create harm. And the glass in this case is obviously a symbol of segregation. So that's what he wants to remove, the segregation. And then the final line of the poem, nothing's changed, declarative, that was used as the title. So we've got repetition of the title. If you watch my form video, you'll know that I talked about the idea of a cyclical structure. That's what we see here, where it begins, it ends, which is perfect because, of course, the whole point of the poem is that nothing has changed, and the fact that it begins and ends in the same way presents the same message. That's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions about what I've presented to you or any of the lines that I've not discussed, do just drop me a line in the comments and I will get back to you. Subscribe if this is helpful. That would be great for me too. Otherwise, that's it from me. Thanks again and happy revising.